Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Greetings, it's Hugh Ballou. Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. We're almost to our 7th year of doing these interviews with really amazing people with great stories to tell. And I like the story. I don't know if it's true or not, the quote from composer-conductor Ralph Vaughan Williams, the British composer-conductor, who said, "See, music did not reveal all of its secrets to just one person." So we have people with varying knowledge and background and great wisdom to share. Today is no exception. We have Dr. Ira Kaufman, who lives here in Lynchburg, Virginia with me. And so Ira, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange, and give people a little sense of who you are, just a few minutes of background about Ira Kaufman.
Well, thank you, Hugh. I'm very appreciative and grateful for the opportunity to share an hour with you and your colleagues. My background goes back about 5 decades. I was attending Northwestern University, the Kellogg School there, and studied with who's now the father of modern marketing, Dr. Philip Kotler, published about 60 books on marketing, and now has ventured into understanding about what's good for the common good and challenging traditional capitalism. But I studied with him and worked with him some 50 years ago, and looking at how we can translate business principles and concepts and techniques into a world which needed some change. And he wrote a book called Creating Social Change some 50 years ago, which applied, business and marketing techniques to the social sector. I got my PhD, and I did the first PhD in what's called social marketing, which was applying marketing concepts to the nonprofit world of the National Safety Council on defensive driving. And then I began a journey of living in England, traveling some 40 countries around the world, and began working for Legacy International and working with its founder, and was very inspired by his values-driven leadership approach and the work that I worked with him and the group at Legacy, team at Legacy, for about 20 years, and trying to understand how to engage young people and young professionals to implement this values-driven approach to create change in the world. And I evolved in that area, and then began looking at some of the current technologies and how technology was affecting the world, and wrote a book on digital marketing with values. It was the first book on digital marketing. It was adopted in business schools around the world. But it was important because it was integrating strategy and tactics with values. It was taking a very, very different point of view. So there's this common thread of values that have, have been embedded in who I am and what I work with. And then as the book grew and I began to travel about 45 countries around the world and talking about digital transformation and leadership, I met a colleague of mine who became a colleague of mine about 5 years ago in Croatia, Velimir Stuttger. And Velimir was a professor at Zagreb University, one of the oldest universities in Europe. And Velimir was a specialist in leadership and innovation, and a very Renaissance man. Had been in politics and worked on environmental issues and so forth, business consulting. So we began with the challenge of, why is this world broken? We had this really deep-seated question. Why is this world broken? What's fractured in the world with all of the money we have and all of the materialism we have? Why is there so much discord and problems and crises that are growing? So we devoted the next year or so to begin looking at what was the essential foundation of it. And going back to my work at Legacy and his work in looking at leadership, we began looking at values, as the disintegration of values as being something that is central and core to where the problems were. And most people weren't looking at that. They just weren't looking at that. They talked a lot. They proclaimed a lot of things on their boardroom walls, as you know, and they wrote those in the brochures, and they talked about caring and loving and all these wonderful things. But the reality is that they weren't living them, and therefore we have all these crises which evolve. So that's the undergirding. It's sort of an integration of business and marketing with a care and concern for the globe, and an understanding that a values-driven approach is integral to creating a sustainable future. So there's a convergence.
What was the name of that first book you wrote 50
The
years
first
ago?
book I wrote was called Creating Social Change. It was by a publisher called Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, who is since deceased, and it's out of print. But I have, so this is a copy of it. It's still ancient, but that's an old copy of it, 50 years old.
Wow, a lot of words in there.
Yeah.
And your latest book comes out in the next day or two. We're recording this on the 13th of October, 2020. You might be listening to this years later, but it's called Empower Us, and there's a cover behind you. It's on the interview page. If you're listening to this on Facebook, you can find interviews for the Nonprofit Exchange on that URL, the THE Nonprofit Exchange, the nonprofitexchange.org. And you'll find today's episode on the left with should I call you Professor Kaufman, or what should I call you?
Just call me Ira. Fine.
Ira, don't call you late for dinner. So, and you're connected with University of Lynchburg. Somehow you're adjunct professor?
Well, I taught at the University of Lynchburg for about 6 years.
Okay.
In the School of Business, and I taught leadership and digital marketing and transformation, how do businesses have to deal with the question of transformation in their lives.
Are you familiar with the book in the 80s by, I think it's James Alexander Burns, Transforming Leadership?
No.
That's one of the roots of what I teach, transformational leadership. He wanted to transform our political system. I don't think enough people bought the book. So we want to make sure people buy Empower Us, and people can find all about it at empowerus.world. That's a cool. We have lots of dots now. Empowerus.world, and there's a place on that website about the book. You just click on the menu at the top and the book. So Ira, we got a whole bunch of people that listen to this podcast that have a lot of good ideas. So, but I think the ratio is that 3 out of 100 actually do something about them. And I'm sure it's maybe half or less think about writing a book, but actually do it. So talk about a little bit about your motivation. Writing a book like this is hard work. So what was your motivation to actually start this and complete it?
Well, it's a really important question, because it's not about the book. It's really about the journey to make a significant change in the world, and to really allow what's within all of us, this passion for goodness, for sustainability, for change, for the positive, and for leaving a good legacy behind to our future. I have 2 kids, a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they're great leaders, potential leaders, and how do we give them what's necessary? So it's about giving back too. I've been very grateful and fortunate in my work over the years, and to understand that this component called values is really more an item of discussion than an item of action. And so Velimir and I did a look at all the world religions, and looked at what was the essential ingredients and attributes that were important and what were common to them. And we looked at all of those things called values and attributes of a good person, and people that really want to be caring and merciful and understanding and compassionate in the world. And we distilled those into some values. And then we related these values to performance in organizations and how organizations can transform. And we came up with 4 values: trust, empathy, sustainability, and transparency. And they related very clearly to what's happening in the world right now. And we call them the test values. So we made a little acronym. If you test these values in yourself and you test these values in an organization, you're going to get a really good indication, if you're honest and reflective and accountable to yourself, how well you're doing. So that was really inspiring, because we realized that that we need to have some tools which people could really understand in transformation. So the second tool we looked at is we looked at what was our goal, and our goal was to create harmony in the world. Harmony is peace and understanding. I'm a 1960s kid where, you know, we all believed in love and peace and the flower children and all that kind of stuff. And we realized that, you know, harmony was a really good word, because Bellamere was very akin to that whole culture. But we realized that in the 60s, we had a lot of ideals. We had a lot of good ideas, but we weren't translating them into impact and to something which was going to create the kind of change which we feel is necessary and essential in the world to fix this broken world. So we realized we were going to juxtapose 2 words: strategy and harmony, because you need strategy in terms of the technology and human-centered business practices with values to create the kind of harmony we're in. So we merged those together, and we created this roadmap for creating strategic harmony. So that was what drove us, understanding that values were at the core, and how you have to translate those with kinds of strategies to empower people who are frustrated with the world, people who really care but don't know what to do, and people that are in centers of power but either aren't courageous enough or haven't taken the next step to see that there is enough value in utilizing those values consistently throughout their organization and in their strategies and in the impact that they're creating. So that's the motivation.
So when you're, thank you for that. When you're writing a book, do you envision a person that you're writing to?
Oh, yeah. We have gone through that, being a marketing guy. So the first question the publisher asks, well, who's the target market? You know, so the target market is you, is us, is the people that want a world which is more caring, more loving, more understanding, sustainable, and that will allow us to carry forth those kinds of qualities. And there are so many people. We can call them change makers. We can call them human-centered business people. We can call them head of nonprofits who have created these organizations because they want to change the world. We could look at the entire world of spiritual leaders. We could look at students who are now screaming. And I will tell you, the people that we're really looking at is we call the rising voices. The rising voices are the next generation, the Gen Z and the millennials. The women of the world, is they're phenomenal change agents, and they come from a little bit different paradigm than us men. And the marginalized, the people of color, the immigrants, people of diverse genders. These people are screaming. They want to be heard. And for the most part, the leaders are not listening, or they're placating them. They want a seat at the table. They don't just want to be influencers. They really want a way to reinvent a world which can be positive and grow at a sustainable way. So those are the people I really look at. It's both progressive leaders and these rising voices.
In your on the website, and for people that are just joining us, it's empowerus.world, and there's a page for Q&A, and in the part about motivation, you referred to what you talked about earlier. Values are being proclaimed, placed on boardroom walls, on websites, but not being lived and practices in their businesses or organizations. So the gap in our living and living those values is what was broken. So how did you address that gap specifically? And a little more about your co-author, please. You mentioned his name, but a little bit about your co-author.
Okay. Well, Velimir Shirker is I would call him a Renaissance person. He served in the government of Croatia as, I think, a minister of foreign affairs. He's really an acclaimed leader. He's written about 60 books on leadership and innovation, both in English and Croatian. He's a PhD out of Columbia, taught at UCLA. He's traveled 40, 50 countries around the world, and he's a great storyteller too. And he has a great passion for loving and involving people and businesses. He does a lot of consultations in Europe with executives. So that's really that's a background on Velimir, and that's where we harmonize together on how to bring this roadmap into a reality, to let it manifest in a real way. In terms of how we look at these values and how we address them, we dove into a study, which is really a really important study by the Edelman Group. It's called the Trust Barometer. It's been done over 20 years by a group in Washington, D.C., a public relations group. And they study 12 different markets around the world, executives, leaders, people of all different walks of life. And they look at the level of trust in 4 sectors. And trust is a really, really big word in our society right now, in our world right now. And the Trust Barometer looks at the level of trust in nonprofits, businesses, media, and education. And they found that of these 4 sectors, the sector which was most important was business. And they found in the last 5 years, the level of trust in the Western countries was 65% of the people surveyed from all around the world believed that trust was very prominent in those 4 sectors. In the last year, it's gone down in the Western countries to less than 50%. So therefore, in those 4 sectors, there are more distrusters than there are trusters. That's a big statement. So how are we going to countervail that? If there's this crisis in trust, and trust is one of the ingredients of what we call the test values. So we look at where trust was rooted and where the forces of trust were rooted. And they were rooted in power and love. And we look at power. Power is something that in this Western world is derived from fame, money, position, and control of information. And of course, a powerful leader has to fulfill their own self-interest. Well, and that leads to greed and corruption, and that leads to fulfilling the needs of the stakeholder. Excuse me. That whole doctrine was initiated 50 years ago, and the anniversary was last week, by Professor Milton Friedman of Harvard University, which you're shaking your head because you know it. And Professor Friedman created this document which has changed the world. And as a result of what's happened around the world, he said that the social responsibility of business is to increase profits. Now that's a major dictum. And business schools around the world have followed that dictum. Corporate boards have lived that lie or that questionable narrative. And we have created 5 pandemics around the world: COVID, economic struggles, misinformation. People are fearful and feel isolated, and we have the environmental and climate crisis. We have 5 major crises happening around the world. And leaders, when you get back to the question about leaders, why they should read this book and understand it, is they have no solutions, and you know that. They do not have the solutions. So then we looked at where the solutions lie. The solutions lie in love. We always want to, the first thing that we have in our heart is we're attracted to other people. We want to love a person, our family. But we say, and love has been materialized. We want to love objects. We want to love the sexuality of somebody. women and men have been objectified in the world around love. But what is the real essence of love? The real essence of love is love of us, love of humanity, love of understanding who we are, love of the common good. And so we looked at love as a transformative power, and it has to be focused on the love of purpose and the love of values and how you can implement those. And that creates a new set of power. And we have a whole business model for looking at translating values as a source of power in transforming businesses, societies, and a level of adoption in the world of different ideas.
You're getting revved up like some of the black Pentecostal preachers I've had as guests here. So you need another drink of water there.
Well, it's passionate. Listen, when you deal with 5 years with something, you realize this might have a change, so you got to get passionate about something.
I think you believe what you're writing. So actually, you could probably trace some of this greed back to the greed, competitive capitalist, the Rockefeller, Wanamaker, Rothschilds, all those buddies that, and back to Ben Rhodes and his work in South Africa, it stems from sin as a corporate thing, not only an individual thing. It's how do we do it? And we have responsible corporations, but they're few and far between. And the pivot here, Ira, the movement I'm championing is for those of us who are not in the for-profit world, but are running a for-purpose business, and how we need to be active in influencing those people in business to look at the triple bottom line: people, planet, then profit. There's a triad there that's more responsible. So we're talking to people who don't need to get pushed around anymore. People who are community leaders working in a 501 something, 3, 6, 10, and we're actually doing, back to your word love, philanthropy is the love of humankind. And so philanthropy in its true form, which is not just money, it's time, talent, and money. So it's the whole person. It's the whole person. So and we are, in fact, nonprofits and religious institutions, educational institutions are, in fact, a business. And I think learning to run the business, and we don't focus on the corporate greed, but we get lost in that big hole of the lie, nonprofit, which is a lie. So, there's an opposite dynamic that's just as destructive as the greed side. So speak to the where nonprofit leaders in this, what we would call social benefit sector, where can we learn and step up and be influencers?
Well, you've touched on a very special feeling that I have. I was the executive director of Legacy International for 20 years.
Oh my!
So I'm extremely familiar with the begging bowl mentality, and I've walked around the streets of New York and Cairo and London and probably 15 different countries, asking for work, for money and support of good work. And I think the model's backwards. I think the model is totally backwards. I think that what is important in the world is to be able to set out who you are as a very clear brand. Businesses spend billions of dollars on branding. The branding, all that is telling your why in a way which is authentic, genuine, and clear. And what it does, it speaks to the needs of other people. One of the really progressive business leaders in the world, Mark Benioff of Salesforce, is the CEO. He's a man who went to India, wanted to discover his spiritual roots, came back and created the 17th largest Fortune 500 company. It's all values-based and human-centered. Mm-hmm. And he said, the important thing in my company is to discover how values create value. Jay Rash wrote an article in my book called The Value of Values. I think we really have to understand how we empower these values. as part of our brand, because that's what's distinguishing. That's what these business people need. They need to see the value for them. What is the benefit for them? How do they communicate with Gen Z and the millennials now, or these rising voices? They don't know how to do that because they don't have the tools. They still think of the leaders who want to support the new normal, which is the status quo. We say that leadership, the old form of leadership, has to be replaced by what we call as catalyzers. Catalyzers have their eye on one thing: transformation and change. If you look at every entrepreneur right now, they are laser focused on the future and how to use emerging technologies to change the world. Well, I believe that nonprofits have to be laser focused on providing value for their projects or their programs and how it's going to affect their community, the world, and their business. So I would just not challenge you, but suggest that you might want to add a fourth P to the quadruple bottom line. You have planet, we have profit, and we have people. But I would add prosperity, because what most nonprofits are doing is adding to the prosperity of the community. They're helping young people. They're helping food security issues. They're dealing with conflict resolution. They're dealing with community prosperity. They're dealing with empowering communities of diverse people of different colors and nationalities and so forth, immigrant populations. So the goal to me of a nonprofit has to be aligned about laser focus on how they create value for their target market. And the target markets for them, who's going to support them? If it's the State Department or the World Bank, well, then you need to know how to speak to them. If it's a corporation, you need to be able to present what you're doing to them. And you need to present it in ways that they can relate to and they will hang out on. You just can't send it out in the ether. So I think, stating your blog, creating a blog or a statement of who you are, just not preaching to those who love you, but preaching to those who need you and preaching to those who can make a change. And you have to figure it out. I mean, I spent hours, Hugh, hours, just when I was trying to get the people to write the foreword to my book, researching who they were, what they talked about, what was important to them, what they valued, how I can connect with them. It's a study. It's real work. And it takes that kind of targeting, because that's what businesses do. They pay people thousands of millions of dollars to hire an ad agency to do that. Well, nonprofits are very involved in thinking about how they can change the world, but they need to think about how they can attract the support that's needed to change the world, because so many nonprofit executive directors like myself was a fundraiser. I didn't do much programmatic work. I did fundraising. And therefore, all of it was about thinking how I can get money instead of attracting money. I was asking for money instead of giving them things. And I think that's where the essential need is. They have to really rethink and reinvent nonprofits to deliver purpose and value to those people that they want to affect.
Man, I'm all fired up. I'm ready to go shut the computer and go to work. Um, spot on. Amen. So I don't see the mandate for business as any different. I think we're in a for-purpose business, a for-profit, but I think there needs to be an alliance for a nonprofit leader and a business leader to embrace what you just spoke about, because we attract revenue because we provide value. I don't care which side you're on. We just attract revenue. Now, we need to have extra revenue in both sides to invest in people, to do some improvement of our systems, to do some marketing. And some of the fundamental things you mentioned are really sound business principles. You've got to have a clear brand image, a brand promise. It's not just a logo. So what do people say about you when you're not there? That's got to be spot on. And we need to be able to tell our stories about the impact of our work. So I appreciate that. 20 years. Wow. We're going to hear from Mr. Rash here in just a second, see if he has some questions to add. So your book fell off behind you, but we remember what it looks like. EmpowerUs.world. While you're getting it, I'm going to do a quick commercial for CenterVision, the community. CenterVision Leadership Foundation has a community, and it's a community for nonprofit leaders. It's a community where people share together, they learn together, and they become better at what they do, better at building boards, better at building high performing cultures. Therefore, they attract more revenue because they are fund worthy. So you can find out about CenterVision's community. We call it a community for community builders. We're better together. So if you have a smartphone, you send a text to 64600. 64600 is where you send it, and you get and then in the message you put LDR, really short for leader. The number is 64600, and you send the message LDR, and you get a link back, and you get this card. And on the card, you have all about the work of CenterVision and our community. Here is join the community. And by the way, Nonprofit Exchange, here is our Empower Us, from strategic crisis to harmony. And this is our interview today, and we're looking at ourselves there in the picture, Ira. So I'm looking at me looking at the app on the app, which is not a very interesting thing. So CenterVision provides resources for nonprofit leaders and clergy, and we're working on opening the community again. It's closed now. We're adding some things and taking care of our current members, but we'll be opening it, and we're going to open it with partnerships with business and nonprofit leaders, because I think we can do a lot more working together in pursuing this harmony thing. Being a musical conductor, I know a little bit about harmony. And, there's a whole bunch of people in orchestra that don't look alike. Their instruments don't look alike. They don't sound alike. They got different personalities. They even talk different languages in music. But we come together, we make this magnificent sound, a harmony of working together. So explore that harmony a little bit. What needs to, what I'm hearing you say is that we've inherited systems that are broken, and we've learned things that aren't the way they ought to be. So how do we step up and take steps, active steps, besides getting the book? How do we take steps in creating this harmony where we are? I mean, you start where you live, and then you influence others to influence others. So what's the starting point, Ira?
I think the starting point is mutual purpose. We have to agree upon purpose for our why. And I think that in many cases, we have to stop competing with each other, and we have to really start collaborating with each other. And there's a terminology now in the OD field, organizational development field, called radical collaboration. Radical because I think we have to go beyond our, quote, organizational egos, what we want, and we have to be more us-centered than self-centered, and even for a nonprofit. And to me, the future of the world is based upon collaboration. There is enough creativity, resources, and passion and understanding in this world to get us on the right track. But one of the call to actions, which I'll talk about later in the book, is to create collaboration between progressive leaders, both nonprofit and for-profit, those people that really understand the vision and the need for sustainability and are committed to it. But they have to work with these rising voices, the young entrepreneurs, the people, the younger people, the women, the marginalized, who really have the passion to work together. And they just can't be just placated and say, well, we'll listen to you, and we hear what you have to say. But they have to really be given a seat at the table and to really be able to collaborate, to co-create the future together. These are nice words, but they have to really be implemented. Because, it's very nice for leaders, nonprofit or for-profit, to tell the younger generation that what they should be doing. But what are they inheriting? It's a horror. What is my 18-year-old inheriting? It's just unbelievable. Huge student debt. They don't even know what the world tomorrow is going to look like in terms of ecology. Racial disparities, inequities around the world. People earning billions of dollars out of the pandemic, and there's no relief in the United States for the people that are in need. Well, look at the scale, look at the screaming surges of the pandemic in Europe and what's going to be happening in our country in the next 3 or 4 weeks as it gets colder. We don't have solutions to this. And it's all about collaboration and about trusting each other and finding ways to really find common value among us. And I think that's where we have to start. And most people have an open heart to these kinds of things. And you have to find where that point of potential collaboration is. It's around values, around things people care about. It's about love of humanity, love of community, love of Lynchburg, love of the United States. That they want this to survive, love of the legacy for our future young people. If we start with that, then we can build on something. If we start on something partisan or something we want, then we're not going to reach the goal, in my opinion.
We're talking to Dr. Ira Kaufman today, and Ira Kaufman is about to release a book called Empower Us. We're on a podcast, but if you go onto the website, you'll see for the podcast or look at it, you'll see the cover of the book. That's blown up way beyond what it should be. The two authors, From Crisis to Strategic Harmony. It'll be released any day. If you want to be on the list, pre-publication list, go to empowerus.world and click on the book tab, and you can put in a request there to be on the list to get it when it first comes true. So I think it's up to all of us, Ira. We sometimes have people that do the BHAG goals, big wild, lofty goals, but this is tangible. We can do it if we all do it, and then we learn to talk to each other, with each other, not at each other. We've come into a world where we're just yelling at each other because we disagree with somebody. But I have often found that in between two points of disagreement, there's sometimes a little element of truth that if people talking out, they find, oh, there's something we didn't discover. Now, one of the clients I had, you'll probably enjoy this, did competitions of choirs. They couldn't call it Olympics because obviously, but they called it the World Choir Games. And there were 400 to 450 choirs from 100 countries coming to compete in 28 categories until it came to America, which I enabled that to happen. There was 30 because we had women and men barbershop. It's indigenous to our culture. But there 30 were different categories of music that we were competing against, both in the classical genres and the folk genres. And it was amazing to me that people who had nothing in common, who in the real world, their leaders are fighting one another, came together, and we had world peace because we came together with the excellence of our craft, which was music. And even though they were competing, they were cheering each other on. So I got to see this, which wasn't even a goal of World Choir Games. It was to promote excellence in music. And I got to tell you, I was going to be a musicologist, but I got saved. I was drafted and had time to think about it. But I knew a lot about different kinds of music. I didn't know anything. I mean, I heard stuff I didn't believe existed. So for Americans to get outside, you travel a lot. We're going to get Mr. Rash on here in a minute. So there's an education for all of us to learn about other people. So I'm gonna see. Would you entertain some questions from our guests on the line?
I just want to say one thing. Because the book is in pre-publication being printed this week, for those who would like to pre-order it and be on the list, you should just click the contact button at the website empowerus.world and just send me a message and I will connect with you, because the purchase button is not operational at this point. It'll be operational toward the end of the week.
I'm sorry, I led people astray. So yes, put in the communication
contact button. Just send me a message with your email, and I will be happy to connect with you about that.
So we have some people who aren't visible because this is a webinar format and an interview for you. So we have some people, Mr. Rash and Mr. Hopkins both have their mics open. Which one of you has a comment or a question? Mr. Rash, you've been here and we've mentioned your name a number of times. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, I paid him You know, it's like, I have to tell you that it costs to get my name mentioned these days. Uh, no, I mean, what can I comment? I've been blessed to be part of this process of Ira's work and working together with him for 40 years, and I'm so grateful and proud of him for creating, you know, absorbing so much of what we've done together and putting it into this wonderful book, which I actually have a pre-publication copy of in my hand, which I can't show you because I'm not on video. And I've had the honor to write a little piece in there. But I think that always going back to the core values, which is the basis of Legacy International and the basis of what Ira has been discussing with us today and in the book. I'd like him to just take a moment to step back, because it's something we've been talking about, he and I have been talking about, which is what it means to transform the individual, to bring the individual to a point where they can listen and where they can see what he's presenting and where they can hear the methodologies and the means to transform things. So we've been talking about, you know, transforming, well, of course, it's part of my work, as you know, and we discussed it when I was on your podcast, but transforming individuals. And if Ira, you can talk about that for a minute, that would be really good. Value of listening and how to transform the individuals themselves.
Well, to me, in the book, we present a two-stage transformation process. One is the transformation of the individual, and one is then taking that transformation externally to the organization, to the business model, the operations, and the impact. To us, we've spent a lot of time in the book really looking at that internal transformation. And it needs to begin with self-reflection, self-reflection of the self, self-reflection of the organization, and reflection on what your policy is and how you're carrying that out in your externalities, in your branding, your messaging, and so forth. So when we look at that self-reflection process, and this has been undergirded through the work at Legacy and my personal study, it's very, very important to not only reflect, but the reflection has to include an element of accounting for yourself, accounting for who you are, what you proclaim, and what you act on. There's a gap between that. Between what we say, we're going to be trusting of another person, but we control all the information. We're going to be forgiving somebody else, and then we retaliate against them. We're going to be being generous, and we take more than we give. So we have to look at the gap between what we say we are and what we are. And at the same level, on the internal level, there's also an internal level of the organization. The organization has to look at what they proclaim to do, either for-profit or not-profit, and what they're actually doing. You know that they say they're dealing with sustainability issues, and look at the way they produce their products, and look at the ingredients in their products, and is it destroying the earth? Are they really thinking in a circular way, or are they thinking in a self-interest way? Then we have to look at, from an internal point of view, if we're thinking about the self, us as an individual, or are we thinking about the greater humanity? Where is our intention at? And intention is a lot of part of this, because intention creates action and it creates your beliefs. And we have found, and in the book we look about this a lot, and we all live with so many different myths. It was the myth of Milton Friedman, which has changed the world and created the pollution, the crisis we're in now. We have his gift. I have a PhD in business management. It's all been structured on one thing: self-interest, not about human interest, not about who I am as an individual, not about what I care and love and my purpose in my life. So it begins with self. It begins with self-reflection, looking at the mirror, in the personal mirror, in the organizational mirror, and also in the mirror of what the direction that we project our organizations in. That is core, because you cannot do anything before you change yourself. In every spiritual test, it says you cannot change you cannot change your community, you cannot change the world until you change yourself. So we begin with the beginning, which is on intention and values and our beliefs, and to really confront our myths. And then we translate that to a business model, to how we do our operations on our company, and to what kind of impact we get. And the most important part of this is that we must be harmonious in terms of what's inside us and what we live outside of us. Because that gap is what creates the crisis.
Ira, in 32 years of working with leaders, I'm surprised at how few leaders can articulate core values either for their organization or for themselves, and haven't. So therefore, they can't check on the alignment. Are you in alignment with the corporate values in your personal values? And so it's appalling to think that people don't even think that way. So we've really, and what you just articulated about transforming self, you'll be happy to know that's the core of what we teach in leadership at Center Vision. And from the work Burns and Bass, who created transformational leadership, it's about the culture of high-performing people focused on a common vision, which is value-driven. And then the work of Murray Bowen, which is, I've spoken to you about the work of Murray Bowen, and in his work, he's a psychologist, said you can't change anybody. You can change yourself, and other people will respond to you. So that you echo those really well-established methodologies, and I think it's just what we have to do. I want to invite another famous author to comment. I quoted him a minute ago about philanthropy. If you don't have this book, you should get Philanthropy Misunderstood. Professor Bob Hopkins is on here. And Bob, Ira talked a little before you got on about influencing the young generation. And Bob has done that for decades. And I've seen the results of his expanding the thinking of young minds who are really amazing. So Bob, you have comments or question for our guest today?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. I'm Bob Hopkins. Listen, I've enjoyed hearing what you have to say. I want one of your books, Strategic Harmony, and I want two more to give to our senators. I'm listening of Texas. I'm listening right now to the hearings of Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court, and what they need, of course, in our House of Representatives and our Senate is strategic harmony. They need your book. I can't wait to get it. And like you said just a few minutes ago about your 18-year-old son, what do you tell your 18-year-old son? Well, that's what I want to know, what I should tell my students. I teach college. My students are 15 through 19 years old. And I'm sure they're at home most of the time scratching their head thinking, who, what, where, when, why? What is this going to do to me? What am I going to do? What's the transformational process? And I'm glad you mentioned transformation. Hugh had an event not too long ago where one of his speakers, and I can't remember his name, Hugh, who talked about transformation. And those of us who end up on the other side are the ones who have hope and are willing to go through the transformation process. Those who don't are going to be left behind. And
that was the Black Pentecostal preacher I referred to, Kevin Williams, who is a high-level influencer, and he quoted Paul, "Be transformed by the renewal of your mind." That was it, Bob.
Right. Well, exactly. So anyway, I teach speech and communications, and I'm just starting my online class actually this week, 2 or 3 of them. And I feel like my whole semester's got to be talking to these students about hope, in communication, because they hear so much if you listen to television. I almost want to say turn it off, but on the other hand, they learn so much history by listening to what's going on right now with Amy Klobuchar, and she's doing the questioning of Barrett and what she kind of a Supreme Court justice she's going to be. And I think our young people have to be involved in the political processes as well. But the governor of Guanajuato, Mexico, and I'm going there this week, said to me, "Bob, we don't have the culture of giving. We don't have the culture of love of humanity, except we just do it. Nobody teaches us this. We just do it." And then I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we'd actually taught somebody to do this and just amplify it over and over and over again? And I guess that's why I work with the young people. And I'm so glad that you are too. And again, thank you for this book. I'm anxious to get a hold of it. So hopefully we can meet and talk some more.
EmpowerUs.world.
I look forward to that opportunity. Like I said, I have been inculcated for 40 years of my life with Legacy International, which has devoted their purpose to transforming emerging leaders into young people in their lives that could change and sustain the world. But you know, what I really try to do, Bob, with young people when I taught at university, is to really not talk about words so much, but talk about actions. They really value authenticity. They value genuine communication. And one of the first chapter of the book, well, actually in the preface of the book, my kids took me to see Black Panther and the movie, and then they took me to see Wonder Woman because they wanted to introduce me to the Justice League. And those superheroes are really important to young people. Look at how much money that have been garnered by Disney and so forth and so on, and the Marvel people. But they have another message in there. There are subtle messages in there. And you have to speak to people in the language that they really understand. They understand superheroes. They understand that Wonder Woman, at the end of the movie, she discovered her power because she really submitted to love, which wasn't just her skill set. And Black Panther, the same thing. He submitted to a whole different understanding about the power that they had and how they could use it to benefit society instead of greedily taking over the world. So we need to communicate with what's important to them. And we have to discount what the current leadership is doing, because they're not leaders. They're really status quo. They're following money. They're following their old ways. And it's all based upon myths. You know, one of the myths that we dealt with in the book, we listed 20 different myths. And one of them was, if you lie often enough, people believe you, and then it becomes acceptable. Or that, you know, businesses were created to make money for their stakeholders. That's what a lot of people believe. That's what people go into business for. Entrepreneurs go into business for that. Well, we've tried to create the thing called the Global Transformation Corps that say that that's not true. They shouldn't be doing. They should be going into ventures which are going to change the world. It's going to make them profit money for their people who invest in them, but it's also going to impact their communities and the world. It has to be mutual. It has to be another set of things we're speaking to. So, you know, one of the things we've done is understanding that the way, when we look at values and we look at belief, it all translates into the way we look at something, our mindset. Or, you know, in an old world, we used to think about the mindset as being set mind. We have to have a flexible mindset or an adaptive mindset. We call it a catalytic mindset because I believe it has to go beyond the typical transformation. I have a little problem with the world of transformation. When I was at the University of Lynchburg, I set up with the dean the Institute for Transformative Leadership. And we did some work for a year and a half to 2 years with for-profit and nonprofit leaders. And then one day, I Googled the word transformative leadership. And I came up with the name Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Putin, and a lot of other people, which I didn't really think were, but they are transformational. Putin is transforming the world, you know. Xi is transforming the world. So I had to really confront that. So we had to say, well, you know, and young people see the discrepancy between what leaders are, because they're not really leading the way they want to be leading. Because if you look at all the Pew polls, you know, 60 to 70% of the younger generation who are voting do not believe in being Democrat or Republican in the United States. They believe in being something else, something that's going to change and create a sustainable world. They will probably vote for the lesser of two evils in their mind, but they're not really passionately behind them. They're passionately behind transformation or change. So we have to talk to that core in them. That's what they value. And you have to speak authentically to them. So you can go on and, you know, but that's sort of where I really come from. It's about authentically speaking to them about what they care about. They care about transformation and change, and they want the tools. And the tools are embedded in emerging technologies. The tools are embedded in human-centered business practices, which are not the old business practices, and the impact of it. And the tools are involved in empowering their values, giving power to their values, and let them translate those into enterprises and projects which will be fulfilling and change. That's what they want.
So thank you. Bob always has really good stimulating questions. Thank you, Bob. So Ira, we're down to the last 3 minutes here. I want to just as leaving, that's a great title. Talk about a couple of things in our 3 minutes. Why did you come up with that name, Empower Us? You know, what was that thinking? And then what is a critical takeaway for the reader?
Okay. Well, the title of the book was really a 2 to 3 year evolution. We had 15 different titles, beginning Our Broken World. How do we fix it? How do we use values to change the world? Yeah, we came up with 15, 20, 30 different titles. And it finally evolved to, we realized that the book was not about us. It was not about me or what we wanted to do. It was about what we could do. Because the world had changed in the 3 to 4 years we wrote to it, because of the pandemic and because of all the other crises we were facing. The world was getting more interconnected. And we had to have a book which delivered a message of connectivity and interdependence and collaboration. So we looked at the thing that we wanted to deal with, which were values, and we wanted to say, how can we provide more value for values? And so we want to empower these values, and empower us is empowering these values. And in doing that, we're going to move from where we are now, which is this new normal of total crisis, to a new concept called strategic harmony, which is blending these ideas of values and purpose and intention with technologies and human-centered business practices to create a new harmony around the world. So that's where the root of the change and the title came from. It was about trying to put power into each human being to be an agent of change and transformation. So as a result of that, we looked at the entire book, Bellamere and myself, and we said we wanted a statement which really encapsulated who we were. I don't know if you could put that up on the screen, but I'll read it to everybody because I think it's a good closing. And the importance of it is the call to action. Can you put it up on the screen?
Where is that?
It's called the Transformation Declaration. I sent it to you.
No, that's in my email. I was working, so I don't have that. But if you could read it, I want to do a quick sponsor moment and then let you use that for closing, if that's okay.
No problem.
That's a profound way to end. So our sponsor for today is the online community that we call the Community for Community Builders. If you go to nonprofitcommunity.org, you'll get this, and it's a special place where we talk about the things Ira is preaching about today. You're preaching, man. So we help you get traction with the ideas with each other. So it's a network of peers, it's experts, it's the way you learn, grow, and share with one another. So Ira, give us that declaration as a closing today and a call to action.
Okay. So we called it the Transformation Declaration. The new normal has become politics without principles, business without morality, science without humanity, technology without ethics, and knowledge without character. We are surrounded with inequality and mistrust of our leaders and institutions. We've become tribal in our many battles for personal gain. Our governing values are compromised by money, corruption, and greed. If you're frustrated with the world as it is, we challenge you to see the world as it could be and join us to transform it. We propose strategic harmony, bridging the heart and the mind, values and emerging technologies to generate a sustainable future that serves all. We think us, where me is replaced by us, where test values, trust, empathy, sustainability, and transparency are accountable and become the gold standard in our lives. Where love augments purpose, where purpose empowers our future, where equity transcends just ideas and it lives in policy, where technology accelerates planetary responsibility, driving sustainable impact. We think catalytic, where trust is the currency of transformation, where organizations thrive on happiness, authenticity, and innovation, where governance is built on humility and empathy, where economics reflects value for all stakeholders, and where catalyzers realize the new harmony. We call to action the rising voices, the next generation, women and the marginalized, and human-centered leaders to radically collaborate, to reinvent an inclusive and sustainable planet, and to become global catalyzers. We empower us on a journey to strategic harmony. Thank you.
Ira, thank you for your wisdom today and sharing it with Nonprofit Exchange Network. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you.